Geneva, Switzerland. The United Nations Conference on Global Governance began under a grey sky and the sharp gaze of the global press. On paper, it was a meeting for cooperation. In practice, it became the stage for a fierce clash between two ideological titans, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of Brazil. Trump arrived with his delegation in calculated silence. The press was already speculating on what he would say. Beside him, his spokesperson, Karoline Leavitt, told reporters, "Ionori, the president is here to reposition the West, and yes, he's going to make that very clear." Lula arrived shortly after. More casual, surrounded by advisors, he greeted journalists and embraced African leaders. His strategy: reinforce his image as a defender of the global South. The conference hall was packed. Delegations murmured as the two leaders sat side by side. The tension was palpable. Trump would speak first. He stood up, adjusted the microphone, and stated, "America is back, and this time with no apologies. Enough of funding global bureaucracies that deliver nothing to ordinary citizens." Many applauded. Others frowned. Lula crossed his arms, and when his turn came, he fired back. "The world needs cooperation, not walls. Hunger isn't fought with tariffs, but with solidarity." Trump didn't hold back. "Solidarity doesn't fill supermarket shelves. Speaking of which, has anyone here seen the price of coffee in Brazil? Ask the people who's actually helping." The audience murmured. A Swiss diplomat whispered, "This is going to escalate." Lula countered with irony, "I'd rather have expensive coffee than cheap democracy. We're not for sale on social media." Karoline Leavitt was quick to post on X, formerly Twitter, "Expensive coffee is the symbol of failure. While Brazilians foot the bill, the president plays the social justice hero. The UN panel had just begun." And the world already knew this wouldn't be just another conference. It was the beginning of a historic diplomatic showdown, as both leaders traded barbs in front of a global audience. The diplomatic consequences were already unfolding behind the scenes. Delegates from Japan, Poland, and the United Kingdom approached the U.S. team discreetly. Their proposal? An informal pact to lower bilateral tariffs among nations committed to a new logic: productivity without ideological interference. The whispered name: Alliance for Productive Liberty. Trump, briefed on the interest, smiled. "They're done with speeches. They want outcomes. Let's give them that." On the other side, Brazil's foreign ministry was mobilizing. Lula summoned diplomats to urgently build support among BRICS and the African Union. The angle accused the U.S. of trying to sabotage multilateral governance. Meanwhile, in Brazil, the impact was instant. The dollar rose, the stock market dipped. Morning headlines coined the term Geneva effect. An op-ed in a top business outlet read, "Ideological diplomacy will cost Brazil dearly in international perception." Social media exploded. Memes went viral. One showed a bag of coffee labeled luxury item. Another had Lula on a podium with the caption, "Promised bread, delivered inflation." Karoline Leavitt addressed the press again. "While they preach solidarity, Brazilians pay $15 for a kilo of rice. That's not social justice, that's fiscal acrobatics." Trump's approval was soaring. Instant social media polls showed 68% of global viewers favored his message. Lula trailed at 21%, with the rest undecided. Trump capitalized. "This isn't about left or right. It's about who understands the game and who's still watching from the bleachers." At the UN, the next session was about to begin, but everyone now understood Geneva was no longer a simple forum. It had become a geopolitical battlefield. As the verbal duel escalated live across global media, backroom diplomacy was in overdrive. Representatives from Japan, Poland, and the UK began quietly coordinating with the American delegation. Their shared goal: lay the groundwork for a new trade bloc centered on results, not ideology. Trump's team started circulating an internal draft labeled Alliance for Productive Liberty. When briefed, Trump smirked, "They've had enough of slogans. They want results. Time to deliver." Meanwhile, Lula convened a crisis meeting with Brazilian diplomats. His instructions: reach out to BRICS and African Union members and frame the U.S. initiative as a neo-colonial maneuver. In Brazil, economic tremors began. Currency volatility and a stock market slump fed into the media narrative. One journalist wrote, "Geneva wasn't just a summit, it was a warning bell for Brazil's foreign policy." The internet responded with satire. Viral memes flooded timelines. One image showed a luxury coffee package with the label, "Now served in silence." Another read, "He promised equity delivered inflation." Karoline Leavitt returned to the media spotlight. "They talk about equity while the public can't afford beans. That's not reform, it's regression," with a press release. Trump's numbers continued to climb. Online sentiment analytics showed 68% support for his stance, while Lula's dipped to 21%. The rest remained neutral. Trump leaned in. "This isn't a debate between ideologies, it's a choice between those who move history and those still watching it on TV." The UN prepared for the next session, but Geneva was no longer a neutral ground, it was a symbolic battleground. Tensions in Geneva were rising by the minute. Realizing the original agenda had collapsed, the UN convened an emergency panel with both presidents, European mediators, and representatives from the African Union and Southeast Asia. As they entered the room, cameras captured a symbolic moment. Trump carried a red folder labeled Real Agenda, while Lula held a dossier titled Sovereignty and Social Justice. The media feasted on the contrast. The Swedish moderator opened diplomatically. "We ask both leaders to put provocations aside and work toward diplomatic understanding." Trump cut in, "Respect is fine, but you can't negotiate with inflation. The Brazilian people know that better than anyone." Lula responded, "Our inflation is the legacy of a global pandemic and the previous mismanagement. We're correcting it with courage, not cynicism." From backstage, Karoline Leavitt posted a photo of the session with the caption, "One agenda is based on facts, the other on slogans. Geneva doesn't forgive." Back in Brazil, pressure was mounting. The Industrial Federation issued a statement demanding economic predictability. Agribusiness leaders lobbied the finance ministry for lower taxes. With tensions peaking, Trump proposed a public commitment. "Let's sign a simple agreement: economic freedom, respect for producers, and a rejection of disguised confiscation. I'm ready." Lula hesitated. The moderator encouraged him. An aide whispered in his ear. Lula replied, "Brazil doesn't bow to unilateral impositions. We have history, people, and a plan." The response was seen as a retreat. Headlines quickly emerged. Trump proposes global pact. Brazil backs down. The narrative was solidifying, and Lula could feel the ground shifting beneath him. Lula's perceived retreat made headlines back in Brazil. News programs broke into live coverage. Analysts called it an international symbolic defeat without precedent. Markets tumbled. The dollar soared. Business leaders sounded the alarm. 5 of Brazil's largest trade federations co-signed a letter demanding immediate review of fiscal and diplomatic strategies. One phrase stood out: "Brazil is in the spotlight, but for all the wrong reasons." At the American delegation's press conference, Karoline Leavitt didn't mince word. When a leader steps back from truth, the world takes note. Trump never steps back. He moves forward. Facing pressure, Lula called an impromptu press conference in a side room at the UN. Surrounded by aides, he attempted to downplay the situation. And we didn't retreat. We reaffirmed principles. Brazil doesn't sign pre-made deals. But the international press wasn't buying it. An Italian reporter asked bluntly, "President, you speak of dialogue, yet inflation is surging and protests are erupting. What concrete solution are you offering?" Lula hesitated. His answer was vague. The world noticed. Meanwhile, Trump wrapped up his Geneva mission with a final speech alongside allied leaders. The message is clear. America leads. If you want freedom, transparency, and prosperity, you know where to find us. The hall erupted in applause. Even previously neutral countries like Canada and South Korea showed symbolic support. Karoline Leavitt announced Trump would head straight to Warsaw to formalize the Alliance for Productive Liberty. Cameras captured his departure like that of a global campaign trailblazer. In Brasilia, ministers watched in silence. One confidentially summarized, "The UN was the stage, but Trump wrote the script." Back in the US, the White House held a press conference. Karoline Leavitt, sharper than ever, declared, "Geneva was the beginning of a new chapter. Trump proved leadership is action, not rhetoric." American outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Epoch Times headlined, "Trump returns to global stage with impact diplomacy." UN conference exposes fragility of progressive leadership in Latin America. In Brazil, the reaction was chaotic. The term coffee crisis inquiry trended. Coffee prices hit new records, and Finance Minister Haddad's nickname, Taxad, spread beyond. Satire used even by members of his own coalition. Bolsonaro from Orlando posted stories. "We warned you. Brazil needed to show strength. Now we're a global meme. But there's still time to fix this." Lula attempted to regain control. In a national address, he said, "We're under attack because we govern for the many, not the few. Brazil won't bow to diplomatic blackmail," but the response fell flat. Social media mocked him. One viral comment read, "Being leftist isn't the issue. Being clueless while pretending to be a statesman is." Karoline Leavitt added, "Those who speak for the people don't leave them without coffee. Trump gets that. The rest is noise." In New York, the Heritage Foundation released a special report titled The Trump Moment. It read, "He didn't need treaties or tanks, just logic and courage." Meanwhile, in Warsaw, Trump was signing the first protocols of the Alliance for Productive Liberty. In a packed forum, he said, "The world is ready for a new era, and we're going to lead it." Back in Brasilia, the finance minister scrambled to calm the markets, but it was too late. Fitch downgraded Brazil's outlook from stable to negative. At the UN, a German diplomat, off the record, said, "Trump arrived as president. He left as the architect of a new order. Lula arrived as a symbol. He left as a warning." As the conference closed, the UN Secretary General thanked all attending leaders but didn't mention Brazil, observers noticed. Geneva had made history. Trump didn't just win a debate. He shaped what would follow. Social media buzzed with his new nickname, the Engineer of Geneva. In Brazil, internal reviews began. Business leaders, centrists, and even moderate leftists started questioning the country's diplomatic and economic direction. The next morning, while Lula was still on the defensive, Trump posted, "Geneva was only the first move. The next one's already in play.